The silence of Black Ridge Penitentiary was not an absence of sound, but a heavy, pressurized weight that pressed against the eardrums. Located 300 miles north of Edmonton, the prison was a brutalist scar of concrete and steel etched into the endless white canvas of the Canadian wilderness. Inside cell block C, Elias Thorne did not see bars. He saw vectors, stress points, and thermal gradients. He was not merely a prisoner serving a 20-year sentence for high-level corporate espionage. He was an engineer dismantling the world around him with his eyes. For 730 days, Elias had mapped the breathing of the building. He knew that at 3 o'clock hours, the heating system in the north wing cycled down for a maintenance flush, causing the pipes to contract with a metallic groan that masked the sound of movement. He knew that the guards, lulled by the sub-zero temperatures outside, grew complacent during the graveyard shift, their vigilance numbed by the repetition of routine. The cold was their true warden. The assumption that no one would be foolish enough to escape into a blizzard at minus 40 degrees was the prison's primary security feature. Elias sat on the edge of his bunk, his fingers tracing the invisible lines of blueprints he had memorized years ago during the facility's retrofitting a contract his former firm had bid on and lost. That loss had been the beginning of his descent, but now it was his salvation. He looked across the small, sterile space to the bottom bunk. Kaelen Vance lay there, a dormant mountain of a man. If Elias was the mind, Kaelen was the kinetic energy required to set the plan in motion. A former wilderness guide and pilot turned smuggler, Kaelen possessed an innate understanding of survival that Elias lacked. They spoke rarely. Words were liabilities in a place where the acoustics carried whispers through ventilation shafts. Instead, they communicated through a practiced rhythm of glances and micro-gestures. Tonight was not the night, but the night was coming. Elias focused on the grate covering the air intake near the ceiling. He had spent months slowly eroding the masonry around the screws using a mixture of vinegar, stolen from the cafeteria, and abrasive dust scraped from the exercise yard floor. It was a chemical patience, a geological erosion of authority. The wind howled outside, a feral thing clawing at the reinforced plexiglass. To anyone else, it was a sound of despair. To Elias, it was the overture. The meteorological reports, gleaned from snippets of news on the canteen television, predicted a polar vortex instability. A storm of historic proportions was descending from the Arctic Circle. Most inmates feared the cold, but Elias welcomed it. The storm would blind the sensors. The snow would bury their tracks. The freezing temperature was the key that would unlock the impossible. He closed his eyes, visualizing the intricate labyrinth of ducts that ran like veins through the prison's concrete flesh, leading not to freedom, but to the first stage of a nightmare they had chosen to endure. Preparation was a game of subtraction. Every unnecessary movement, every extraneous thought, every ounce of surplus fat had to be stripped away. Kaelen Vance understood this viscerally. While Elias calculated the structural weaknesses of the walls, Kaelen was hardening his body into a weapon of endurance. In the solitude of the exercise yard, beneath the gray, oppressive sky of an Albertan winter, Kaelen did not lift weights. He practiced the economy of motion. He trained his lungs to sip oxygen from the biting air, preparing for the inevitable hypoxia of the escape route. The plan relied on a singular, terrifying gamble: the waste processing plant. Blackstone was a self-contained ecosystem, processing its own sewage and trash before hauling the compacted residue away. The logistical weak point was the transition zone between the internal processing unit and the external loading dock. Elias had deduced a window of 4 minutes during the shift change of the automated loading arm. But to reach it, they needed a tool that did not exist within the prison inventory. Kaelen's role had been the acquisition. It had taken 6 months of bartering, intimidation, and sleight of hand to acquire the components. A hardened plastic spoon melted and reshaped. A tension spring from a stolen ballpoint pen. A fragment of a hacksaw blade smuggled inside the spine of a hardcover library book, The Count of Monte Cristo, a cliché that Kaelen appreciated for its irony. Using these fragments, Kaelen had fabricated a makeshift tension wrench and pick. It was crude, ugly, and fragile. It had to work exactly once. The dynamic between the two men was defined by a mutual, silent desperation. They were not friends in the traditional sense. They were symbiotic organisms. Elias needed Kaelen's raw strength to lift the great and his navigational instincts for the wilderness. Kaelen needed Elias's intellect to bypass the electronic locks and the architectural maze. They sat in the mess hall, trays of gray mash untouched before them. Elias tapped his finger twice on the table, the signal. The storm is 3 days out. Kaelen gave a barely perceptible nod. His eyes scanned the perimeter of the room, tracking the guards. He wasn't looking at their faces, but at their belts, specifically the RFID fobs that granted access to the maintenance corridors. They didn't need to steal one. That would trigger a lockdown. They needed to clone the signal. Elias had constructed a passive receiver from the copper wiring of a discarded radio and a watch battery. It was taped beneath the table where the head guard, Officer Miller, always sat for his coffee break. For 3 weeks, the device had been harvesting data. Today was retrieval. As the inmates rose to clear their trays, Kaelen stumbled, a calculated clumsiness that sent him colliding into the table. In the chaos of the feigned slip, his hand swept under the table edge, peeling the device free. It was done. The digital ghost of the key was in their possession. The variable had been secured. Now they just had to survive the wait. The prison hummed with a low-frequency vibration, the electric pulse of thousands of volts coursing through the perimeter fence. Elias lay awake, listening to the heartbeat of the beast he intended to slay. The cloned signal from the RFID fob was useless without a delivery system. This was where Elias's genius transitioned from theory to practice. He had repurposed a contraband digital music player, rewiring the output jack to transmit the cloned frequency rather than audio. It was a crude, desperate piece of engineering, but it was their master key. The psychological toll of the impending escape was heavier than the physical risk. The fear of hope was a poison. To hope was to invite the crushing weight of failure. Elias forced his mind into a state of cold logic. He mentally rehearsed the route through the sub-basement, down the laundry chute, through the steam tunnels, into the maintenance shaft, and finally, the sewage treatment sector. Every turn, every camera angle, every sensor blind spot was etched into his neural pathways. There was a discrepancy in the blueprints, a detail Elias had agonized over for weeks. The schematics showed a pressure sensor on the floor of the main corridor leading to the treatment plant. If the sensor detected weight without a corresponding authorized ID badge swiping at the door, the alarm would trigger. They had the ID signal, but the system might cross-reference it with the guard's actual location. They needed a distraction so massive that a system anomaly would be ignored as a glitch. The distraction was the prison's boiler system. Elias had spent months sabotaged by proxy. During his assigned work duty in the laundry sector, he had subtly altered the chemical mixture of the detergents, increasing the salinity. Over time, this saline heavy water had been pumped into the secondary heating exchange. Corrosion was eating the sensors of the boiler room from the inside out. It wasn't a question of if the boiler would malfunction, but when. He timed it for the storm. When the blizzard hit, the demand on the heating system would spike. The sensors, weakened by corrosion, would fail to register the overpressure until the emergency release valves blew. The resulting chaos steam alarms, pressure warnings, the scramble of maintenance crews would blind the central security hub for the critical 10 minutes they needed. It was a plan built on dominoes. One failure, one sensor holding out longer than calculated, one guard turning a corner too early, and it was over. Elias rolled over, staring at the concrete ceiling. He could feel the temperature dropping in the cell. The storm was arriving early. The ghost in the machine was ready to scream. The world outside ceased to exist. The blizzard struck Blackstone Penitentiary with the violence of a sledgehammer. Winds clocked at 80 miles per hour screamed against the walls, creating a whiteout so dense that the guard towers were invisible from the ground. The prison went into a Code Gray limited movement, essential staff only. It was the perfect shroud. Inside the cell, the air grew frigid. The heating system was straining, just as Elias had predicted. At 2 o'clock, the alarms began. Not the sharp, rhythmic claxons of an escape, but the low, grinding wail of a mechanical failure. The pipes in the walls groaned and shuddered. Somewhere deep in the bowels of the facility, the boiler's safety valves had ruptured, filling the lower levels with blinding, scalding steam. "Now," Elias whispered. It was the only word spoken. Kaelen moved with the fluid grace of a predator. He was at the ventilation grate in seconds. The loosened screws gave way instantly. He pulled the heavy metal grid down, catching it before it could clang against the floor, and laid it gently on the mattress. He boosted Elias up first. Elias slid into the narrow, dusty throat of the ventilation shaft, the darkness swallowing him. Kaelen followed, pulling the grate back into position behind them, holding it in place with a loop of wire to withstand a cursory visual inspection. They were in the lungs of the prison now. The shaft was claustrophobic, smelling of stale dust and old grease. There was barely room to crawl. They had to move in perfect synchronization, sliding forward on elbows and knees. The sound of the wind outside reverberated through the metal ductwork, masking the scrape of their uniforms against the galvanized steel. Elias led the way, counting the rivets, measuring the distance by touch. Left at the junction, straight for 20 meters, down the vertical drop. The vertical drop was the first major hurdle. A sheer 10-meter fall into the sub-basement access. They had no rope. Instead, they used the friction of their bodies, pressing back and feet against the opposing walls of the shaft, shimmying down inch by agonizing inch. The physical strain was immense. Kaelen's muscles burned, but his breathing remained steady. Rhythmic. They reached the bottom, dropping silently into the maintenance corridor. The air here was hot and humid, thick with the steam escaping from the sabotaged boiler system. Emergency lights bathed the hallway in a pulsing crimson glow. It looked like the interior of a dying artery. Elias pulled out the modified music player. They approached the heavy steel door of the waste processing sector. This was the moment of truth. If the hacked signal failed, they were trapped in a dead end with alarms blaring. Elias held the device to the black panel of the card reader. His thumb hovered over the play button. He glanced at Kaelen. The big man was tense, a coiled spring, ready to use the shiv he had fashioned if the door didn't open. Violence was the backup plan, a messy, desperate alternative they hoped to avoid. Elias pressed the button. A second of silence stretched into an eternity. Then a distinct click, followed by the hiss of hydraulic seals disengaging. Green light. The door swung inward. They slipped inside, closing the door softly against the latch. They were now in the waste processing plant. The smell was overpowering, a slurry of rot, chemical disinfectant, and raw sewage. Giant compactors loomed like sleeping iron giants in the shadows. The noise of the machinery here was deafening, a rhythmic thumping that vibrated in their chests. They moved along the catwalks, staying in the shadows cast by the high industrial lights. The target was Compactor Unit 4. According to Elias's research, Unit 4 handled the dry waste paper, plastic, and shredded documents. It was scheduled for a compression cycle and ejection in 12 minutes. The plan was terrifyingly simple. They would become the trash dot. They climbed the ladder to the hopper of Unit 4. Below them, a mountain of shredded paper and cardboard waited. Elias jumped first, landing softly in the debris. Kaelen followed. They burrowed down, digging deep into the refuse, covering themselves with layers of shredded bureaucratic waste. The smell of ink and dust filled their noses. Then the warning buzzer sounded. The conveyor belt jerked to life. They were moving. The walls of the hopper narrowed. Ahead, the crushing darkness of the compression chamber awaited. This was the part Elias feared most. The hydraulic ram would exert 2,000 pounds of pressure. They had to position themselves in the void space, a structural flaw in the compactor's design where the ram didn't fully meet the back wall, leaving a gap of 18 inches as the steel plate descended. Blocking out the light, Elias curled into a fetal position, pressing himself into the corner of the metal box. He felt Kaelen doing the same beside him. The mechanical whine rose to a shriek. The walls closed in. The trash around them compressed, becoming as hard as wood. The pressure built against Elias's back, a crushing weight that threatened to snap his ribs. He held his breath, praying the schematics were right, praying the hydraulics would stop. With a groan of straining metal, the ram halted. They were trapped in a coffin of steel and trash, compressed but alive. Then the floor dropped out. They tumbled out of the compactor into the freezing night air. They were in the external dumpster, a massive metal container sitting on the loading dock outside the prison walls. The shock of the cold was instantaneous. From the humid heat of the boiler room to minus 30 degrees in seconds. The sweat on their skin began to freeze immediately. They scrambled out of the debris, gasping for the biting air. They were outside, but they were still within the secondary perimeter, a chain-link fence topped with razor wire and motion sensors. However, the blizzard was their ally. The heavy snowfall was wreaking havoc on the laser grid, causing false positives so frequent that the guards had likely deactivated the audible alarm in the tower to preserve their sanity. Visibility was less than 5 feet. The searchlights from the towers were merely diffuse glows in the swirling white chaos, unable to penetrate the veil of snow. Kaelen took the lead now. This was his domain. He moved low, watching the ground for the depression in the snow that marked the drainage ditch. They reached the perimeter fence. It was 12 feet high. There was no time to cut through. Kaelen laced his fingers together, creating a step. "Go," he hissed, his voice swallowed by the wind. Elias stepped into Kaelen's hands and was launched upward. He grabbed the top of the fence post, careful to avoid the razor wire coils. He swung his leg over, balancing precariously, then dropped into the snowbank on the other side. He turned, waiting. Kaelen, without the leverage of a partner, took a running start, a silent shadow charging the metal mesh. He leaped, fingers hooking into the links, and hauled his massive frame up with sheer brute strength. He vaulted the wire, tearing his sleeve and the skin beneath, but he didn't make a sound. He landed beside Elias. They were free of the cage, but now they faced the executioner, the Canadian wilderness. The nearest town was 40 miles away through dense forest and knee-deep snow. They had no winter gear, only their thin prison blues and the adrenaline pumping through their veins. "North," Kaelen said, checking a compass he had swallowed and regurgitated 2 days prior. "We go north." "North is death," Elias chattered, his teeth clacking together. "South is where they look," Kaelen replied. "North is where we vanish." The forest was a cathedral of ice. Spruce trees, heavy with snow, loomed like juges in the darkness. The cold was a physical entity, a predator that gnawed at their extremities. Every step was a battle against physics. The snow dragged at their legs, sapping their energy. Hypothermia was not a possibility. It was a timeline. They had maybe 3 hours before their bodies shut down. Kaelen led them with an unnatural certainty. He read the landscape in the dark, using the wind direction and the texture of the snow to navigate. They weren't running aimlessly. They were heading toward a specific coordinate, a needle in a haystack the size of a province. Elias was struggling. His intellectual brilliance offered no warmth here. His limbs felt heavy, clumsy. He began to hallucinate, seeing geometric patterns in the swirling snow. "Kaelen," he mumbled, stumbling. Kaelen grabbed him by the collar, hauling him upright. "Move! If you stop, you die. If you die, I leave you." It was a lie, but a necessary one. The anger sparked a flicker of heat in Elias's chest. He pushed forward. They heard the sound of a drone overhead, a faint insect-like buzz cutting through the wind. The prison had launched thermal imaging, UAVs. "Down!" Kaelen shoved Elias into the well of a fallen tree, burying them both under a drift of loose powder snow. They lay motionless, entombed in the white. The drone hovered above, its electric eye scanning for heat signatures. But the snow was a perfect insulator, and their body temperatures had already dropped dangerously low. They were becoming one with the landscape. The drone lingered, then banked away, defeated by the storm. They rose, 2 ice sculptures animated by sheer will. "How much further?" Elias rasped. 2 miles, Kaelen said. Blue Creek. Blue Creek was not a town. but a frozen tributary hidden deep in the valley. There, beneath a hunting blind that had been abandoned for a decade, lay their salvation. This was a part of the plan that predated the prison. Before their arrest, Kaelen had established a series of dead drops across the province for his smuggling operations. This was the deepest one. The emergency cord dot, they reached the blind, a rotting wooden structure barely visible against the tree line. Kaelen fell to his knees, digging frantically at the frozen earth beneath the floorboards. His fingers were bloody, the nails torn, but he felt the hard plastic of a pelican case. He dragged it out and popped the pressure seals. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the keys to life: thermal parkas, Gore-Tex boots, high-calorie energy bars, cash passports, and a flare gun. They stripped off their prison rags, their skin blue and mottled, and pulled on the thermal layers. The warmth was agonizing as blood rushed back into their capillaries, bringing a stinging pain that made Elias gasp. They ate the energy bars voraciously, feeling the sugar hit their systems like a drug. "We aren't walking out of here," Elias said, looking at the gear. "No," Kaelen replied. He reached deeper into the cache and pulled out a set of keys. "We ride." Buried 50 yards away, under a camouflage tarp and 3 years of pine needles, were 2 snowmobiles. They were older models, carbureted engines that didn't rely on complex electronics that could freeze. Kaelen primed the engines. They sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life, the sound shocking in the silent woods. But they didn't head south toward the highway. They turned the sleds north, deeper into the nothingness, toward the frozen spine of the Rockies. They were driving away from civilization, deeper into the trap. Or so it seemed. The rail line cut through the mountains like a scar. It was a freight corridor connecting the deep-sea ports of Prince Rupert to the industrial heartland of the continent. The trains that ran this line were behemoths 2 miles long, hauling shipping containers through the most desolate terrain on Earth. Elias had memorized the schedule. Train 404, bound for the coast, passed through the Switchback Pass at 5:30. Because of the steep grade and the sharp curves, the train had to slow to 15 miles per hour. They ditched the snowmobiles in a ravine, covering them with branches. They stood by the tracks, the wind whipping their new parkas. The ground began to tremble. The headlight of the locomotive cut through the snow. A blinding eye approaching from the east dot as the engines roared past, throwing up clouds of snow. Elias counted the cars. 1, 2, 3. He was looking for a specific container code. Kaelen spotted it. A rusted red container near the middle of the train. They ran alongside the moving steel beast. Kaelen grabbed the ladder of the car, his boots slipping on the icy metal, and hauled himself up. He reached down, grabbing Elias's forearm. The grip was iron. Elias was pulled from the ground, swinging wildly over the churning wheels that could slice him in half in an instant. They climbed between the cars. Kaelen worked the locking mechanism of the container doors. It was frozen. He hammered at it with a pry bar from his belt, shouting with exertion. The latch gave way with a screech of metal. They rolled inside and pulled the heavy doors shut, plunging themselves into total darkness. The container was not empty. It was filled with crates of industrial machinery parts destined for export. But in the corner, cleared out and lined with thermal blankets, was a space prepared by a contact on the outside, a ghost from their past life who owed them everything. they collapsed on the blankets. The train gathered speed, the rhythmic clack of the wheels becoming a lullaby. They were cargo now, invisible, untraceable, heading to the ocean. 2 weeks later, the sun was a physical weight, but unlike the crushing cold of Alberta, this weight was golden and warm. The air smelled of salt, hibiscus, and jet fuel. Elias sat on the lanai of a private estate on the north shore of Kauai. He held a glass of iced water, watching the condensation bead and roll down the side. The Pacific Ocean stretched out before him, an endless expanse of turquoise. Kaelen walked out from the house, wearing a linen shirt and sunglasses. He looked different, his beard trimmed, the haunted look in his eyes replaced by a calm vigilance. "The news is calling it a tragedy," Kaelen said. Tossing a tablet onto the table, Elias glanced at the screen. The headline read, "Escaped convicts presumed dead in wilderness." The article detailed the discovery of the snowmobiles at the bottom of a ravine, seemingly crashed. DNA evidence, blood found on the torn metal, confirmed the identities. They bought the crash site? Elias asked. Hook, line, and sinker. The blood samples we planted were convincing enough. The wolves took care of the rest of the evidence we left behind. As far as the Canadian government is concerned, Elias Thorne and Kaelen Vance are frozen meat in the bottom of a canyon. Elias looked back at the ocean. The twist wasn't just the escape. It was the funding. The corporate espionage Elias had been imprisoned for hadn't been a theft from a rival company. It had been a theft from the syndicate that secretly owned the prisoner, massive private equity firm laundering money through the correctional system. They hadn't just escaped. They had stolen the encryption keys to the syndicate's offshore accounts before they went in. The prison sentence was just a waiting game, a place to hide in plain sight while the heat died down and the codes matured. The escape was the withdrawal transaction. "We're dead men," Elias smiled, raising his glass. "Ghosts." "To the afterlife," Kaelen replied, clinking his glass against Elias's. They weren't just free. They were the owners of the very fortune that had built their cage. Behind them, the lush green mountains of Hawaii rose up, shielding them from the world. They had traded the white hell for the green heaven, and the world had stopped looking for them because you do not search for ghosts. The frozen meridian had been crossed,